Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Yes and Then What, where we basically talk to people who have gone through improv and sort of are taking those skills now and applying them in new and exciting ways. My guest today is Yvonne Landry, who I've known for quite some time from back in our old Chicago days, and she has been a dancer, an actress, a stuntwoman, an improviser, a theater owner, and now she has a superhero training academy that we talk about as well. So, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my talk with Yvonne Landry. Hey, everybody. Can you please introduce yourself to the crowd at home?
Hi, my name is Yvonne Landry. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. And can you just give us sort of like the brief sort of like headline of your varied resume?
Okay, so I started out as a dancer, and then I started doing improv, and then I was in Chicago for about 10 years doing improv, went out to LA, did more improv. My parents got sick, went back to New Orleans. Oh, and I had done some stunts, some live action stunt shows during that time. Went back to New Orleans. I opened a theater in New Orleans, an improv theater, ran that for almost 14 years, and now I'm in Atlanta. And I run a training center that is specifically designed to train action stars.
Great. That is such a great, I mean, we could spend the whole half hour talking about that, but I wanted to sort of backtrack a little bit. So you started as a dancer. That was before I knew you. That's interesting. I didn't even know that. And so then how did you, or why did you make that transition from dance into improv?
So my degree is in dance, and I had a scholarship to what is now the best dance college in the country, but previously it was the second best. So I was a really hardcore dancer. You know, I was like jazz, musical theater dancer. So at my school, we had weight requirements, and at 5'10" and 133 pounds, I lost my scholarship.
Oh, wow.
Because they said I was too fat.
Oh my God.
So that's how I ended up in Chicago. So I said, well, I'm just going to go study at Gus Giordano for the summer, which is a big jazz dance company. And I just won't eat all summer. I'll lose weight. I won't eat all summer. So I was in dance class and I was taping my shin splints. And this guy in my dance class was like, God, you're so funny. You know, I had gotten to know a guy. And he was like, you're so funny. You should do Second City. And I said, what is that? And he said, oh, that's where everybody from Saturday Night Live comes from. So I was interested immediately and signed up for classes at the Players Workshop that day. So then I took classes, and they have heterosexual boys in improv class. And so I was so excited because you got to understand, I was living sort of a sheltered life in that I was surrounded by women all the time, dancing 8 hours a day.
Right.
So I was like, this is great.
We were talking before we started that you went to an all-girls high school.
Yeah.
And then you went into dance, which was like in your situation, was a predominantly female activity. So you were like, boys, oh my gosh.
I was like, boys, and they like me, you know? So, I mean, I was like, you know, sort of an awkward, I was really tall. I grew 6 inches when I was 14. I had a goiter. So you know, it took a while.
Oh my gosh.
I have a thyroid disease, so I had a big old goiter like for a minute until I figured out what it was. So I was like, you know, boys started noticing me when I was maybe like 16, but I didn't date. So I got to Chicago and I was like, boys like me. This is exciting. So I went back to my college in Oklahoma. I went to the same college as Kristen Chenoweth. So I went back to my college and I said, I had gotten down to 122 pounds. And I said, can I have my scholarship back? I was like skin and bones. And they said, no, keep losing weight. We'll tell you when to stop. And I was like, nah, I'm going to go hang out with the boys.
Right. 122
so
that's like you're a whisk.
I was very thin.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I found Columbia College, and Norm Holly was my advisor. And all of my credits transferred. So I just finished out at Columbia, and then I would train with Hubbard Street, and then I would train at Second City. So Martin DeMatt was my teacher my senior year of college, was my improv teacher at Columbia and at Second City. It was great. and I would go walk down the street and train at Hubbard Street. It was great. So that's how I got to Chicago.
Yeah, Norm Holly was one of my teachers at Second City, and we had a really funny, I think it's funny, he maybe not even remember it, but like our first was the 8-week class, and for 4 weeks, he didn't give us any notes. Like we would do a scene, like we would do scenes or whatever, and he would like scribble in this little notebook, we'd do scenes like for 4 days, like bang, bang, bang. And I'm like, I was like desperate to like get better at improv. I was like so in love with improv. And so like, so finally in the 4th week, I was just like, and I don't even know where this came from. And in retrospect, I was like, what was I thinking? I was like, are you gonna give us any notes? And then he just like leaned back and he closed his book. He's like, okay. And then he like read everyone in the class up and down. I was like, all right. And everyone's like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, I just wanted to know what was going on. Like, are we getting closer or farther? I couldn't tell. You know, it was.
Was he paying attention?
Yeah, it was.
Right. Yeah, he was my level 5 teacher at Second City.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
Martin was my level 5 teacher. He directed our show and stuff. It was super fun.
Also great.
Yeah. Cool. So you're studying at Second City, right? And you're doing that sort of on that track. Did you study anywhere else in Chicago?
Yeah, I did. Well, so you got to keep in mind, I watched your artist the other day, whose name I'm not remember. Yeah, I watched her the other day.
Okay.
And I think I have a very similar background where when you were a dancer, your training is dance every day, dance every day, dance every day, dance every day. You know, like Baryshnikov, I remember there was this documentary that I watched about Baryshnikov where he was like, you must dance every day. Sometimes you don't feel like dancing, you still dance every day, right? So that was our training. So I tried to apply that to improv. So I trained everywhere I could train. So I trained at Second City, The Annoyance, and IO. So I did everything you could do at that time.
Simultaneously or sort of sequentially, or?
I did Second City and Annoyance simultaneously. And then I started hearing about Improv Olympic, AKA IO. As I was graduating Second City, it was like, hey guys, let's go form a team. And I was like, that sounds great. You know, I want to be famous. So I went and started taking classes at IO, and I knew Susan already from Annoyance. And so Susan, I probably took Susan's class 6 times. I mean, I'm like just I think you and I have that in common in that I'm like a perpetual student.
Yeah.
I'll take the class until I feel like I got it. I'll take the class over and over again. I love to learn. So yeah. I took as many classes as I could take.
So that's a pretty broad education. Second City, Annoyance, IO, all different approaches, all different styles. So as you're sort of doing this, we'll get to IO in a second, but in the big picture, how did you sort of coming from dance to improv? Dance is a very disciplined, very sort of rigorous activity, and improv is not as much. It's a little bit more loosey-goosey, at least I remember sort of at the time, a little more loosey-goosey. Things weren't sort of quite as, we had some steps ahead from like the kitchen rules, but not a ton. And people were still discovering a ton of stuff. A bunch of forms were still being created during this time. It's a very exciting, vibrant time in improv. How did you find the transition from dance to improv?
I mean, it was eye-opening because also the other thing was, I mean, you know, I came from, I don't want to say super sheltered because I'm from New Orleans. So we went out to bars and stuff when we were in high school, but you know, I went to all-girls Catholic school. Then my first year of college, I went to the University of Southern Mississippi and I was in a sorority. So to make that transition was just like, Mick Napier kind of wanted to break me. You know, like he was like, this is like one of my best friend also from New Orleans was living with me and he was like, these are the 2 most heterosexual women on the planet. Like I wore bows. I wore sailor dresses and bows when I first got to Chicago. Right. So it was hilarious to Mick, right? So, I mean, I remember being at like backstage with Mick and I picked something up and I was like, what is this? And it was a cock ring, you know, like I was just sort of naive. So that was the biggest thing was socially, it was a real culture shock for me to be around people who were super liberal and it was a very different upbringing than I had, let's put it to you that way, right? Sure.
Yeah.
And it was all night.
And as you were sort of like getting out of dance and into improv, right? You sort of find this, you have a great sort of entree with Norm Holly and your and Martin DeMott, like really early on in the process. That's really fantastic. Super lucky break there. And then,
Yeah.
but so what did you like about it, or what sort of initially? I mean, your friends sort of said, "Hey, you should try this out because you're funny or whatever." But what did you like about the work? Like, why not take one class and stop? What was that experience like for you?
Well, I loved it. I mean, I just dove in. For one thing, I liked being able to eat. That was a real benefit of improv versus dance.
Right.
Eat,
Sure.
because I like eating. And then also, I love the idea of working without a script and just being able to create whatever it is you want to create. One of the things that drew me to the Annoyance was that they were doing musicals, and I had sort of a musical theater background. So I think that was one of the draws of the Annoyance to me. But I love the idea of being able to create a Second City sketch show and doing whatever it is that you think is cool and putting together a show. I love the idea of that. Of course, IO ended up becoming kind of my home for like 8 years. I was on different teams for 8 years. Largely, it would be me and 9 men. And, that was its own thing as well that I was okay with most of the time. But I love that idea of like, I can sing a song in the middle of a show. If I want to sing a song in the middle of the show, I can kind of do whatever I want. I think that was the appeal.
So you like the freedom. In a lot of ways, it's sort of opposite of dance, where dance is sort of like they had a rigid, or at least your experience, they had a rigid body
Yeah.
type in mind. There's dance,
Right.
there's certain dance technique. Your turnout isn't turned out enough, or
Right.
whatever. And now improv is like this. You have sort of general rules, but it's really open. That's super interesting. So let's talk for a second about your experience. Like, so IO, that's where we met years ago.
Right.
And,
Yes.
And you said, I think very typical sort of that time period, the team was you and a bunch of guys.
Yes.
Right. And so I mean, I think, first of all, there wasn't as many women in the school, in the work at the time.
Right.
Right. And so, so that was like its own sort of issue. But what was that like, being like one of the few women that were sort of in it and in the mix of it?
I mean, there were things about it that were really cool, in that like, I sort of enjoyed knowing that I would be able to play. And I had trained with Susan Messing. She had like an all women's class at the Annoyance, and I found that to be super helpful. And it was something that I was comfortable with because I had already come from this all female background. So I took her class, and it was like, just do what you got to do. Don't wait around. And I really took that advice to heart. Like she used to say, just get out there, get out there. And I do think that's a thing that traditionally now, at least from my generation, what I see also, what I've seen as a teacher is sometimes women will hang back because they're polite and they're like, go ahead. No, you go ahead. No, you. It's like, you're on stage, just go. Whereas I think men have to be aggressive, football, that sort of thing. So they're just more used to getting
men sort of have traditionally sort of been those sort of initiators. And,
right.
And so, we're addressing a lot of that, and it's hopefully changing, but these are traditional sex roles that we've been involved in. So I think that's really interesting. I just want to sort of hang an answer on this idea, because we were talking before, and you were saying how you came from a predominantly sort of upbringing, like of this all-girls school, and then dance, which is like this predominantly female activity, and then you have Susan Messing, who's a great female influence early on, and so you sort of had your feet under you.
Yeah. I think so.
Sort of on an equal footing with other women. So you just sort of maybe envisioned yourself in this more sort of equal frame.
Yeah, I wasn't afraid of men
at
all. I mean, I wasn't like, oh, they're better than me, or, oh, I should wait until they call for me. I definitely never had that attitude. Now, what I dealt with a lot, because there weren't a lot of women, was that there was always sort of somebody hitting on me. That was a little bit, I don't want to say it was irritating. I wish that they had asked me out on a date. I tell people this because they're like, oh, did that suck? And it's like, well, I wish they had asked me out on a date if they liked me, not just like, hey, not make like lewd, rude comments to me, and wait to see if I laugh. You know what I mean? Is she laughing? Oh, I'm just kidding. You know what I mean? Like, I would have loved to not have that piece of it. But, at the same time, I was on teams with Pete Gross. I was on teams with really great people. I was on this team called Stool Witch. I had a team that Dell directed called was a musical team. So
Right,
I
so
feel like
I lost you
overwhelmingly
there.
my experiences were great.
That Del directed.
Jimmy Do,
Great.
and it was a musical team. So it was like Dave Holmes and Ryan Archibald and I don't know, 9 guys and me. But I loved it, you know, it was a musical team and that's kind of my wheelhouse. So I love that.
Do you
I had
feel
great
so,
times.
sorry, I don't want to sort of make you speak for all women, but I'll just say from your experience, do you feel like that, would you recommend when it's available for women to take that all women's class? And what do you feel like you got out of that class? Obviously, Susan is a force of nature, no matter if it's like a co-ed class or an all-female class or whatever. I mean, you're going to get a lot out of her. I really enjoy her teaching style, and I think that she really is great at sort of jazzing up and empowering people for sure. What do you feel like you got out of that sort of all-female sort of climate, and would you recommend it for?
I would definitely recommend it. So the first class I took was Susan Messing and Jody Lennon. Do you know her?
Oh, sort of, yeah.
She's in New York now. I ran into somebody who was like, oh, I know her. Like, I think she was on my resume from a million years ago. So what they did was they said, let's take all of the tropes, all of the female tropes, and play them. The things that we say we don't want to play, the wife, the PE teacher, the ballet teacher, whatever it is, and we're going to play them. That was one of the things we did. And it was like, yeah, great. I got so much out of it. I feel like Susan is really my mentor. You know, I feel I feel like I might not be improvising today if it wasn't for Sue Messing, because she really empowered us. Now, the thing that was a little bit of a challenge for me was that I was so young.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was a senior in college when I moved to Chicago and was just full feet in, and everybody else was maybe 9 years older than me. So that was a little bit intimidating. Plus, it was like, I just feel like they were much more worldly than I was, right? So, but at the same time, I think it was great. I think women should always try to take classes with women together, especially because I have that background of like this all girls schooling already. So I was never afraid to raise my hand or to speak out, but I think there are women who don't have that and they feel like they have to wait their turn for men. I never really felt like that. So but I thought it was great. Nonetheless, it was great. I felt really comfortable in the class and I learned so much.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure. I can imagine. And then IO at the time was a very sort of exciting place. As I said, like a lot of forms being created, and it was a very creative time. Improv was still young, kind of in a lot of ways, and long form was just sort of really coming into focus as a thing in Chicago
right.
and elsewhere. And yeah, do you remember any shows that you thought that really were formative for you, that really sort of stuck in your mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, Armando, of course, just started when I was there. And what I liked about Armando was the idea that you didn't necessarily have to have a rehearsal when you had really well-trained improvisers. Not to say that you shouldn't rehearse, but you know, I've had this conversation before. It's like when you've been improvising for 30 years, you can do a quick check-in rehearsal kind of thing with your other improvisers and you should be able to play with them, I think. I don't know that you need to have necessarily a weekly rehearsal. So I liked the idea of well-trained improvisers who could play together. I loved that idea.
Yeah.
I also, of course, love the storytelling. And I was talking to you last night about was it called the Melanie Show that you did with Melanie Blue?
Melanie Blue or something. I totally remember. I have the vaguest recollection of that. I was only in the show for a little while.
Yeah.
And I got seduced away by Matt Besser, who was doing the Real World. I ended up sort of being in that show.
Yeah. So I thought that was a great show.
But
because it was sort of the precursor.
Sort of like Armando format of her telling stories, and then people
right.
Sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
So Melanie Blue had this crazy background. She had been an addict and her husband had died. And so you guys would do improv based off of her stories, which I was fascinated by. I loved that show. I loved musicals. You know, I loved the annoyance musicals that were wild. I ended up being in, you know, they had all these crazy names for the annoyance shows, like co-ed prison sluts and stuff. Mm-hmm. I ended up being in Cannibal Cheerleaders on Crack. I replaced Alexandra Billings in Cannibal Cheerleaders on Crack. Yeah, that was a crazy show. So, you know, I mean, I love all that kind of stuff. I love the idea of just taking the risk and jumping in. I love Baby Wants Candy, although they were later on from when I got to IO. But, you know, I just love to go and watch improv. I would go to IO and just sit and watch improv for hours and hours and hours and go like, what are we doing? Cool. I love it. I love Valhalla. Were you on Valhalla?
No. I was on
Okay.
only at IO. I was only on a couple teams. I was on Faulty Wiring was my first team, then
Yeah.
Work was my second team, and then I
Oh,
just
right.
went to Tribe, which became Bitter Noah as my real project.
Right. And so was Aaron Sullivan was on Wolf, yes?
I think so. Yeah, Wolf was like a
She was like my best friend.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she was like my best friend at IO. So I spent a lot of time watching her shows.
Okay.
So I saw a lot of Wolf shows. So I mean, there were so many great shows though. You know, it was a great time in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
Yeah, I remember the interesting thing about Armando for me was I remember I was in Dell's class at the time. I'd taken this like a couple of times. And in this
Right.
round, he was really interested in a leader. Like, could one person lead the improv and sort of this kind of idea? And we did like different variations of invocation on one person and one person telling stories. So we were sort of experimenting with this in class at around the time that Armando came to Dell, and he was making a couple of, but I'll say Armando came to Dell with this, and so it was like really interesting to see it sort of go from the lab to out in the wild and sort of become kind of the thing that it became.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's push forward a little bit. So you're at IO for a long time, and along the way you're an actress as well.
Yes.
Yes. And so you're doing this, acting, and this, and then tell me about how you sort of got into doing stunts.
Okay, so I was doing Cannibal Cheerleaders on Crack.
Sure.
There, I don't know, are you familiar with that show at all?
I'm familiar with it by reputation.
Okay, there's some nudity in it, and
Oh.
so I was just like, I'm just gonna say later on in life that I wanted to do this thing as a crazy experience, which I did. That was crazy, and so out of my wheelhouse. So I did Cannibal Cheerleaders on Crack, where I was half naked for part of the show, and you know, at the time I had a good body. I was a dancer who had a good body. So somebody was like, God, you're so perfect for this stunt show. And so some stunt coordinator came and scouted my show, which is awkward because he saw my boobs, and asked me to audition for a show. So I was like, okay, but the show was in St. Louis. And I was like, do I want to go live in St. Louis for the summer? I have a dog. So then they were like, well, why don't you just go audition in Chicago? So I auditioned for the Great America Wild West stunt show, Western stunt show, and I got it. And they wanted tall women, and I'm tall. So I got it. And then it was like, oh, this totally plugs into everything I love because I was physical. So, you know, I learned how to do high falls, and I ran around. I probably ran 5 miles a day, and fell off of a ladder, and I learned how to do this thing where a guy would run at me with a horse and I'd have to jump up on the horse. I mean, it was really fun. It was fun. So I did that for a couple of summers. And then from there, it was like, oh, I'm going to go out to LA and do stunts. And I auditioned for some stunt show in Japan, and, you know, so I did that a little bit. And then when I got to LA, I was doing more stuff where I could once again exploit my body for money. So I did, like, you know, stuff where I'd wear a bikini and be an extra, and they'd pay me a few extra bucks to do that. And I body doubled. I did a body double job on Frasier. So I did all that, right? So then when I moved back to New Orleans, my mother was very sick. So I moved back to New Orleans, and I was like, I guess my career's over. I'm just retiring. And then I hooked up with a stunt coordinator in New Orleans, and they started asking me to do some stunt stuff. So I did some stunt stuff. I mean, but really, it's another thing where you often have to be really thin. So I got asked to do.
You said that yesterday.
I was like 15 pounds too fat.
We were messaging about it. Why do you have to be so thin to do stunts?
Well, you have to match the actress.
Oh.
And they're all skinny.
I see.
So, like, I got asked to double Melanie Griffith. That's her name, right? Griffith? Melanie Griffith.
Griffith.
So, it's Griffith, right? So she was 5'10" and 115 pounds. Well, I wasn't 5'10", I was like 130, 30 to 35. So I didn't get the job because I was 15 pounds heavier than her. And then another thing I did was called Nikki and Nora. It was about 2 girl cops. And I replaced her stunt woman because she was too fat. And they fired her for being too fat and brought me in, which is awkward. But you gain weight, whatever. But she didn't fit in the costumes anymore. And so they brought me in to double her. So, I didn't do a lot of stunt work. And then the last stunt job I got offered, I was pregnant with my daughter and I was working on a movie. And they also asked me to do stunts on that same movie that I was working on as a principal actor. And I was like, I'm hiding this pregnancy, so I'm going to say no. And so I just used it as an excuse. I was like, oh, well, I'm already principal actor. I think I want to go with the acting thing instead of doing the stunts on it. So I said no. And then I gained weight and never did stunts again. Because I had kids.
That sounds like a ton of stunts to me. So the person's like done 0 stunts. That sounds like a ton of stunts. So let's just sort of track. As the whole idea of the series is this. So as you're an actress and as you're a stunt performer, right? What does improv play into that, or what lessons did you learn from improv that you could bring through these different activities? They're all sort of still acting related, kind of, but what sort of lessons helped you out, or did you use again?
Well, what I found was interesting, I think, is that I had an agent sort of at a young age because I was dancing and like kind of modeling when I was a teenager. And so I had an agent really young. And so they would send me on acting jobs, but I didn't have any experience acting. But I thought, oh, I want to be an actor. And so that was part of the thing with my current program, was that I realized I didn't have enough acting training, So I would go out for really big things because I was an improviser and I maybe looked the way I looked, so they'd be like, oh, she looks Eastern European. We'll send her out for this Twilight job, for the movie Twilight, where she has to be like the Russian mom or whatever. So I would just improvise and I was just completely winging it. And so that carried me through pretty far. But ultimately I went back to the idea of my dance roots of well, I need to be in class more. And why is my ego in the way of that? Is my ego in the way of that? I kind of had to check myself and go, what am I doing? And then I realized I've never taken Shakespeare. I've never taken a Shakespeare class. I had never at the time, I have now, but I had never taken a Shakespeare class. So I was just winging it fully on improv. And I think I did okay with that, So that's kind of, is that the answer to your question? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So you had that sort of go for it spirit, and sort of you were just kind of using the basics of improv, responding in the moment, and that was kind of your acting training at the time. You were just sort of relying on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely.
Let's move forward just a tiny bit. So you have done stunts for a while, and then you move back to New Orleans, and you open a theater in New Orleans.
Yep.
And you're doing, as I recall, you're doing a combination of, it's a comedy sports theater, right? But you're also doing long form sort of as well, right?
I started with long form, just as a long form theater. And then eventually I got the comedy sports license because I thought it would be helpful to get corporate work.
Sure.
So I eventually got the comedy sports license.
Sure. And so that's the two ends of the spectrum, really, as far as I can figure it in a lot of ways. So what was that experience like, or how did you sort of flip between those two extremes of style, as a owner, operator, performer, director? I imagine you're sort of wearing all those hats at the time.
Yeah. So, well, it was a big adjustment for me because, again, I hadn't done comedy sports when I was in Chicago. I had only done long form in Second City. So that was an adjustment, was playing clean. And then also, there's a lot of rules, which felt awkward for me at first. But then I grew to really love comedy sports and to really believe that comedy sports is sort of improv for everyone. There's that argument of, is long form improv chess for chess players? You don't really want an audience who doesn't understand what the hell you're doing. Whereas comedy sports, everybody can understand what's going on. We get it. Also, when I first moved back to New Orleans, it was 2002. So improv wasn't really there yet. They had one group called Brown, who Ken Jeong was on. He's famous now, like the Asian Dr. Ken. He was in this group called Brown when he was also doing stand-up. They had like that group, and a guy named King Collier was in that, who is a friend of mine from Chicago as well. So they were good, but they were doing games. So they existed, but there wasn't a lot of improv. So there was a lot of me saying, do you know what Whose Line Is It Anyway is?
Sure,
It's sort of what we do, but long. Like explaining long form is so hard. I've also learned that lesson is like, say what you're doing, the comedy show, as opposed to like bucket of jumping monkeys, like then you have to explain that. Like in a market where there's not a lot of improv, you can't be so coy and vague with what you're doing. You know what I mean? You have to be like, we're doing a show that's comedy, haha, funny, like that needs to be your show title.
And don't come and see.
So my
whatever.
Right.
Interesting.
And my show title was God's Been Drinking, which was confusing to a bunch of New Orleanians who didn't know what long form improv was. It was like, what are they doing? So, so that was a good lesson. Comedy sports, you didn't have to explain. 2 teams compete for points and laughs with the referee calling fouls. The end. That was easy. So that was kind of that. And I also do think comedy sports is very easy to produce commercially. I think the training for comedy sports is great because you can go play for anybody. So I got a lot out of it.
Yeah. Do you feel like, let me ask you this question that I sort of think about a ton. And I know my experience, I started off in short form and actually did comedy sports for a little while when I was living in Maryland. And before I really dug into long form when I got to Chicago, but I felt like my short form experience, that background really helped me above my peers who were just starting in long form, who had just been doing long form. I really feel like that was a big advantage. Did you find the sort of, back and forth of skills from those 2 different styles influencing each other, helping each other?
I didn't, because I did it backwards. So, for example, I didn't have any experience with stuff like styles. Now I do, of course, but, somebody asked me to do play a Shakespeare game. I was the worst one. Whereas I felt like, I had already been improvising for 12 years or something when I got the comedy sports license. So no, I really had to learn. And then I love to rap. Like in high school, they used to call me Yo-Yo Yvonne because I love to rap. And so, but I never could figure, I was like, I had to figure that all out. It was hard for me. 185 now, that's easy.
Sure.
But I couldn't figure it. I really had to sit down and rack my brain of like, I would practice 185 jokes. So no, I did not have that experience. I wasn't very good when we started.
We're running low on time, but I do want to start talking about what you're doing now. Let's talk about the endeavor that you're involved in now. Tell me about the school. It's a school that trains action stars.
Yes. So I started this program. Specifically, I started watching action movies, right? And saying, why are all these leads British, Australian, Irish, Scottish, and not Americans in American action movies? Not that I begrudge anybody work, but why are they getting the work? What do they have that we don't have? Because it's clearly something. So then I started researching and I was like, they have better training than us in a lot of things. Now, I don't think they have better training than us in improv. I will argue that we have the best training in the world. And we're also really good at tactical, war, military stuff. Those are our strengths, right? We like war. So, but I was like, what are they doing that they're so good at? And so what they were doing is multidisciplinary training, and they were hitting it hard, and they were doing it every day. So I started a program where we take ballet, improv. This year we're going to do Chekhov. This year we're doing broadsword, taekwondo, tactical training, voice, accents and dialects, Shakespeare, and on camera, all in 1 week. So I just was like, I want to make it so that my students, you can't not hire them because they're so good at everything.
Right.
And then 4 times a year, I bring in masters. So last year I brought in James McAvoy's voice coach. You know that guy?
Uh-huh.
I brought in one of the top 3 viewpoints people. I brought in Todd Stashwick, who you know, and I had a guy lined up to come from the Globe in London, but then COVID hit. So crazy masters. So it's pretty exciting because, you know, I'm such a student and I'm taking the classes, of course, but that's the goal, is just to, you know, instead of going to London and training, I'm bringing it here.
That's interesting. What I love about that, what I think is so interesting about that is that it sort of brings back this sort of like ingrained dance approach of like every day, hitting it every day in a very disciplined sort of way. And I've known a few dancers in my life, and I feel like all of them have this very similar, meticulous, like real sort of thought out work ethic. And I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting to see it sort of circle back again and again. It's sort of, now you're sort of at the leading edge, and so you get to call the shots, and this is sort of your approach. That's really interesting. So what I think is so interesting about the academy, we've talked about it a few different times. I think it's a really great, interesting idea. And
Thank you.
but the question that I have to ask, as the guy that I am, is why add improv in here? You're doing swords, you're doing tactical, you're doing ballet, you're doing all these classical forms, Shakespeare, whatever, and now you're adding in improv. Why was it important for you to have improv as a piece of this action academy?
Well, first and foremost, that's what I teach. So, you know, of course, I'm going to teach improv. I think it has great value. Number two, I really feel like we're the best at it in the world. I mean, European improv, what they're great, but they took a minute to catch up to us. You know, as I still think American improv teachers are very valued overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's because we have this strong training that I feel like is a good 15 to 20 years ahead of what they were doing. They're catching up quickly, of course, and they're getting really good at it. And now there's improv everywhere. But I think I think we're really good at it. And so of course I want to teach the things that Americans are good at, like tactical training. You know, I love Keanu Reeves. I know we've talked about this. I love Keanu Reeves. And I watched John Wick and I was like, I'm going nuts. You know, I want to be in John Wick, right? I want to know how to do that. I want to know how to hold the gun. I want to know how to shoot. I want to know how to do everything. When I saw The Matrix, I wanted to take Kung Fu, you know, so I want to know how to do everything. And improv is absolutely one of those skills. And when you have good, strong improv training, it's incredibly helpful. So that's why.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a great catch up and talk with you. It's
Thank
such
you.
an interesting, I mean, we've been friends for a while, but it was just so great to be able to drill down on some of the things that you've, the different paths that you've taken, and more than I even knew. And so interesting how improv is still sort of a piece of that puzzle, even now today. Is there anything
Thank you.
else you want to share with the audience, like any advice or any sort of lessons that you sort of learned in improv that you sort of you know, really want to sort of get across to them, or anything that we haven't covered that you think is, you know, what's really important? I really want to say this.
Yeah, well, two things, if I may.
Of course.
I'd love to mention my website if you don't mind.
Of course.
Would that be okay?
I'll also put in the description down below so people can just click on. It'll be very easy.
Great, because it's like an 8-month program, so it's very intense. So it's www.superherotrainingscenter.com. So you can check out what we're doing.
Cool.
And then also, I think one of the things for me that's been kind of a life lesson is something is always better than nothing. Doing something as opposed to waiting for the opportunity to fall in your lap is always better than nothing. So, you know, creating your own content, creating your own show. I think that's such an important lesson and message that I hope that people walk away with, because especially now it's like, what do we do? I don't know, get on and make a vlog, you know, get on and shoot some video, because what we're doing now it's detrimental, I think, to everyone's mental health to not be doing anything. Something is better than nothing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, if there's a message that I believe in more, I don't know what it is. Something's better than nothing. Make your own thing, especially in this present day where you have a worldwide distribution network for free at your disposal, and you have like a, you know, high definition digital camera that you carry in your pocket, like why wouldn't you? I couldn't be
Right?
more excited about that message as at any point. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing
Thank
your time and
you.
your experience. It's so fun. And I think everyone's gonna get a lot out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I think you're, honestly, I love what you do, Paul. I think you're one of the best improv teachers in the world. I think you don't get as much credit as you should, because I think you're one of the best improv teachers in the world.
Oh my
And
gosh, you're the
I'm
sweetest.
excited. I'm not kissing up. I just think you're really great. So, and I love what you do.
Well,
So
thank
thanks
you
a lot
very
for
much.
having me.
Well, let's end on that note. Before
Okay,
I don't
we
think
will.
it's gonna be better than that. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.